Welcome to TYTSports, everybody. Ben Mankewicz here. The Atlanta Hawks making more news off the court than on the court, but we're talking about the Atlanta Hawks. Not that hard to do. So this story, which now has two ugly components for the Hawks, begins last week when the controlling owner of the Hawks, Bruce Levinson, self-reports an email that he sent back in 2012 essentially to the game operations staff, to Hawks management. You've seen some of the quotes, and they're not pretty. Essentially what Levinson says is the crowd is 70% black, the cheerleaders are black, the music is hip-hop, the bars at the arena, at Phillips Arena, are 90% black, few fathers and sons at the game, he says. The concerts afterwards, again, were hip-hop and gospel, and he thought catered to a black audience. Also that he even objected at one point, he said he'd complained about the kiss cam being too black. Now, that's the terrible part, and it is terrible. In his defense, he put this all in a business context, saying, I don't think any of this is wrong or a problem, and I don't think people should feel dangerous, and our fans are awesome. He said, but that fact is scaring away some fans. So essentially, what he was doing is mitigating the fans who actually came to the game in order to cater to the fans who are scared and racist. So in the end, Levinson again reports himself to the league, and then we learned, has now said, that he is going to sell his part of the team, which must come as a relief to the league. So here's what Adam Silver had to say about Bruce Levinson. The views Levinson expressed are entirely unacceptable, in stark contrast to the core principles of the NBA. He shared with me how truly remorseful he is for using those hurtful words, how apologetic he is to the entire NBA family, fans, players, team employees, business partners, and fellow team owners for having diverted attention away from our game. It's a nice thing for Adam Silver to say in stark contrast to the things he had to say about Donald Sterling. But again, I really don't think it's fair to group Levinson in with Sterling's company. Levinson was bumbling and foolish, but again was trying to express things in a business context, but they were thoroughly inappropriate, and I think it's wonderful that he's doing the right thing and selling his controlling interest in the team. Here's what Levinson had to say. I trivialized our fans by making cliched assumptions about their interest, hip-hop versus country, white versus black cheerleaders, by stereotyping their perceptions of one another, i.e. that white fans might be afraid of our black fans. By focusing on race, I also sent the unintentional and hurtful message that our white fans are more valuable than our black fans. If you're angry about what I wrote, you should be. I'm angry at myself too. It was inflammatory nonsense. And that's actually correct. It was inflammatory nonsense. So that theoretically should have ended the problems for the Hawks, but it didn't. Because now the new CEO of the Hawks, he's been on the job not that long, just a few months, Steve Koonin. Steve Koonin, in all fairness, was my boss at Turner for Turner Classic Movies. And I gotta say, I've worked for a lot of people, and few people had as much widespread respect as Steve Koonin did. I know him a little. He likes sports. He's a really good guy, and what strikes me as a principled guy. But in fairness, I do know him, but he strikes me as an enormously principled man. And he is taking over the team until a new buyer is found that Levinson is selling. That also put Koonin in the position of having to discipline the general manager of the Hawks, Danny Ferry. What we've learned this week is that back in June, right after the NBA Finals, when the free agent period started, Danny Ferry read a scouting report to all the Hawks team owners, the majority owner and Levinson and a bunch of the minority owners who have a significant interest in the team but no real power to determine what free agents they would pursue. Nonetheless, all these people, basketball personnel and ownership, was on a conference call when Levinson read quotes about what was initially an unnamed player, but now we know is Luol Deng. Of the Cleveland Cavaliers, formerly of the Chicago Bulls, a player the Hawks were interested in signing. Rumors had it that the Hawks were a leading candidate to sign him. They brought him in, they talked to him. And the comments that Ferry made, although now it turns out he was reading them from a scouting report outside the organization, were incredibly troubling to a number of people on that conference call and would be troubling really to anybody with any sense of justice in America. Here's the first part of what Danny Ferry said on that conference call.
You can shoot the shit out of it, but he screws you up in other ways. So is he really worth the $20 million? I would argue that if we can get him the right way and get him in the right space, absolutely. But it doesn't come without some risk. You asked about, I talked about Jimmy Fry, Boris Diallo, Cephalosha, Luol Deng,
Nothing wrong with that. That's just basketball talk. Whether a player with the skills, with those specific skills, is worth the 2 years, $20 million roughly that the Hawks were offering. And ultimately, that's almost exactly what Deng signed for, to be LeBron James's replacement in Miami. Tough for anybody who's got to be LeBron James's replacement. Here's the rest of it. This is what Ferry read again, and this is the inflammatory part that got him in trouble and the Hawks further in trouble.
So, I mean, I have, if you want to, like Luol Deng, for example, Michael, to talk a little bit more about him. The rap on him is a little bit, body's not as torn up as you think. Although he's played a lot of minutes, if you manage it the right way, he'll be fine. He's still a young guy overall. But he is also, he's a good guy overall, but he's not perfect. He's got some African in him. And I don't say that in a bad way other than, he's a guy that...
Great comment with Sterling. I take this shit. That's going to be on TMZ tonight.
Behind you, if that makes sense. Like, he has a storefront out front that's beautiful and great, but he may be selling some counterfeit stuff behind you. And that, when I say that, I mean, for example, he could come out and be an unnamed source for a story. And 2 days later come out and say, that was absolutely not me. I can't believe someone said that. But, thousands of reporters, it's him. He could be a lawyer in the locker room when the coach is not around. But when the coach is around, he's the greatest guy in the world. He could be a guy, for example, in Chicago, they would tell you that he was good for their culture, but he was not a culture setter. Because he played hard to all those things, but he was very worried about, his bobblehead being the last one given away that year, or that there's not enough stuff of him in the team store. So, he's kind of a...
I'll be honest, that's the first time I'd heard it. I'd read it. It's the first time I'd heard it.
What's striking to me, though, about, they're all laughing in the background.
Well, yes, except two of the guys who were laughing are saying that's going to be on TV. Like, they're laughing because I took that as an uncomfortable laugh, like, I can't believe they're saying this.
Okay.
So Ferry's getting out of this because he was reading from a scouting report. It does not sound to me like he was reading, but it's been established, it's been reported that he was in fact reading from a scouting report delivered by another organization. But I love how the story has been portrayed because it says that Deng has a little African in him. And then he said, I don't mean that in a bad way. And then you hear those guys talking. And then he says, but he's like a guy who would have a nice storefront out, but then he'd be the kind of guy to sell you counterfeit stuff out the back. That's a bad way. Okay? That is a bad way. You can't just say, I don't mean this in a bad way, but you're the evil kind of Jew who steals all the money from me and hoards it all in the banks and controls the movie industry, right? Like, we know as Jews, that's the bad thing you say, right? So I don't see how you get out of that by going, I don't mean that in a bad way, but he'd sell counterfeit stuff out of the back, out of his storefront. And then he proceeds to say things which I find incredibly puzzling, that he would be the clubhouse lawyer, the locker room lawyer, but when the coach is there, he'd get along with everybody. Like, don't you want a guy? So here's what you're saying about him. He'd be a leader. Luol Deng would be a leader. Of course you should sign him. And of course, given the Hawks' history, they didn't. Now, I've always liked Danny Ferry, and that comes in part because I liked his dad, Bob Ferry, who was the Bullets general manager forever. Danny Ferry grew up around basketball, around guys of all races. And so I am relieved that he was reading this, and I'm relieved in a sense that both Steve Koonin, who is, as I said, although it's a guy I did work for before, is a principled guy, and Adam Silver, who's I think we've established would not be quick to exact swift justice, but both of them have said that this is not a firing offense. Here is specifically what Adam Silver said. The discipline of a team employee is typically determined by the team, and in this case, the Hawks hired a prestigious Atlanta law firm to investigate the circumstances of Danny Ferry's clearly inappropriate and unacceptable remarks. In my view, says Silver, those comments taken alone do not merit losing his job. The Hawks have not said exactly what the punishment was. Presumably it's monetary. But Ferry has apologized. Some other general managers around the league, including Toronto Raptors general manager Masai Ujiri, who's from Nigeria, wrote a column in the Toronto Globe and Mail where although he criticized Ferry's comments, obviously he did say that ultimately it's okay to forgive Ferry. His quote, Ujiri's, "Danny's mistake will remain tied to him for a long time. What he said can't be unsaid, but we must measure his heart. If he has made an honest, isolated error, we should forgive and move on." That seems to be a reasonable choice here, only because he was reading someone else's scouting report. Whoever wrote that scouting report, they gotta go.